Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Flash. So, I want to take a minute or two to do a channel update because it's been a while since I've gone on and done a video, and then I will get into the review. So, it'll probably take a minute or two. So, from the last time of which then I had gone on to review till now, there had been a number of movies and shows that have come out during that time. Since I can go on and do this hopefully more regular now, because I had left for health and or personal reasons. I got very distracted by things. I hope to, of course, come back and be able to do certain videos that, of course, may end up being me reviewing things in bulk. Because, of course, there have been a number of new releases that have come out, and I just want to get my opinions out there. And also, there might just be people that are like, oh, great, he got to see this, and I want to know his opinion about it because I want to see it as well. Or maybe at some point it might be available on a streaming thing somewhere, and I want to check it out that way. So, and definitely you could probably check out a app called Zelliphonic, Zelivonic. And at some point, probably even The Flash will probably be available on that app for you to see for absolutely free, and so on and so forth. So, or you could check out Box HD. Hopefully, both of those apps are still to be available on a Google Play Store. Search them in your Google Play Store. See a number of movies and shows for absolutely free. So yeah, there is that hopefully coming, and so let's go on and let's talk about The Flash. So, this movie goes on and tries to tackle a lot in one film. So, when I'm going to go on and try and talk about this movie in a very cryptic-like sense, and then we'll get into spoilers, I feel like I may have to go back to certain things, or I might have, so we'll kind of figure this out as we go. So, for the Flash movie, we have to realize first that this is to try and cover the Flashpoint event, which, of course, was covered first in comic books, then adapted into an animated movie called The Flashpoint Paradox, which I really did enjoy. I really liked that movie. And so I was like, good luck for a live-action movie covering this. Then we also had the Flash show that was to go on and do its own like Arrowverse Flashpoint event thing. And so I was like, okay, at some point, if a live action movie is going to cover this, it's like, it's already kind of been covered a lot by this point now. So we now have the Flash movie that is to cover Flashpoint. And we have this be forcibly like a movie that's covering a big event for Flash, as well as it also being an origin kind of thing. So it has to kind of cover a lot of ground. And so the thing that I think is a big miss for this movie is there's, to me, not really a villain in this movie. You could say it's like, well, the villain was so-and-so, or the villain was this, or the villain was that. Like, I don't really feel that there's a definitive villain in this movie. There really isn't. Or a villain really for Flash to legitimately fight against, but that's just me. Most of this is just kind of bringing back certain kind of things that people enjoyed the most about the DC movies, or just DC stuff in general, because for every single Warner Brothers film, there has to be a selling of a catalog to a number of people, and that's what kind of gets very annoying about these films. Because we not only have to go on and have a scene, and this like perfectly helps you understand what they did in this film. At one point, we have Henry Allen, who is pouring some obvious soda-like liquid into a cup, and there is no branding on that plastic thing. But then we have a scene where Barry is talking to Barry, and there is a big massive Looney Tunes logo in the background where I'm like, oh, okay, I can see where like Warner Brothers is only trying to sell Warner Brothers stuff in their films. And so we, unless they're also just trying to sell like canned goods. But so anyways, we want me to kind of do like a best thing, worst thing. So let's kind of do that now, and still try to be as kind of cryptic as we possibly can, and then we'll get into spoilers after I can kind of dissect all of this, because there's just a lot about this movie. So best things are to easily be Michael Keaton returning as Batman. That is the best thing about this film. And the hardest thing about this movie is like, man, I can't wait till Michael Keaton Batman shows up. And man, I want more scenes of Michael Keaton Batman, because I do not care at all about Ezra Miller Flash in this entire film. But we'll get to that in a second when we get to Bat Things. So, on another positive, I actually really liked this Supergirl. How she really just kind of comes off as like X-23, where she's just kind of like tearing guys in half, and the way that she just kind of goes about like this whole movie, I was like, man, this is just really good. This is so good. I really liked this character. And then eventually what happens between both Michael Keaton and the Supergirl character, I was just kind of like, okay, that just... the best things about this movie, they go on and just kind of ruin it. But it is what it is. So I also like the fact that there is like a big kind of Man of Steel story kind of going on in this film, because for the longest time I have always said that I've wanted a Man of Steel 2, and technically we had gotten that in a way with this film. And so now we have to go on and kind of mention the negative things. Like, there isn't really even though there is a villain in this movie, it's not a good one. It's not a good enough showcasing. And the worst thing about this movie is actually Barry Allen the Flash himself. Ezra Miller comes off to me as a very annoying Flash. I do not like him as the Flash at all. If only we could have had a Flash movie years ago that would have actually been Ryan Reynolds, I would have been a lot more pleased about that film than I would this movie. And so also, like, anything that is to be like tied to like the Flash, as far as any like kind of side characters or whatever that they try to put into this film, I didn't like either. I didn't like Iris. I didn't like any of Barry Allen's friends. Like, basically, none of those characters I actually cared about, and I think a lot of them were way better done in the show than they were in this film. And that just really sucks. We also have like the whole Easter egg thing of this movie, which there is some really fun and good kind of like Easter egg kind of things where we have to realize that certain movies almost had an actor play within them, and for some goofy reason it just didn't work out. it's like the whole Mandela effect or whatever of this movie, where we at some point have to kind of reference like Back to the Future, how it had two different actors, and we also have to go on and uh, kind of have you remember about a bunch of content that Warner Brothers was to have put together at some point, or stuff that they almost did put together, but it just didn't pan out. And so when that does come up, some people may be very baffled and confused why we're kind of seeing certain characters the way they are, or certain actors being involved in this film. But there is a logical reason for that. And for those of you who do not quite understand, I will be happy to explain why that goofy Easter egg was to be involved in this film. Because obviously, yeah, there is some kind of weird Earth stuff that was kind of like, okay, why does that exist? But so, anyways, other than that, the opening sequence that the Flash is to be involved in with Ben Affleck's Batman was also just kind of like, wow, that is really cringe. But I can understand maybe they were trying to go with like a comedic thing for Barry to do as a mission, but it just comes off as like that is the weirdest, bizarrest way to like to enter into this movie. But yeah, so we also have to realize that because of like the Flash book or comic book story, that both Batman and the Flash are to be kind of key tying in characters, and really I think there's going to be a lot of people who of course will go on to have wanted certain things that were to have happened in this movie and left them very disappointed. So really it's hard to please everybody, or also this movie is to kind of go into so many goofy directions that I would have to say this movie is to leave me with a grading of saying there's things that I really do like and enjoy about this film, but there's also things that I straight up thought was too freaking goofy and I hated about this movie. As well as also, I'm like, okay, we have to say that this movie is technically a Justice League film, but doesn't really have all of the Justice League members there. Obviously. So it's like, it's a Justice League movie, but it's not a Justice League movie. And I just have to just kind of weirdly leave it at that. Or kind of go on to state that they have to kind of weirdly create their own kind of like Justice League thing in some portions of this movie for whatever goofy reason. So, with that said, let's just go on and let's get into spoilers, because I've already been talking for far too long about this film. So, with that said, let's go into the double 5 time territory, and let's just go into spoilers. It's spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about the time I get to spoil this movie. So I'm not gonna go into perfect detail about every little bit of this film, as I had gone on and seen it hours before, and I'm coming to you now reviewing this. So I would recommend people going and seeing this film, but to not have to rush to a theater to see it. I was to have gone on and seen this movie on a weekend, and it really didn't seem like there was a lot of people there. So I was like, wow, that's kind of telling. But yeah, but this movie had been out for a couple of days, but still, I was like, man, like, nobody's really here to see this movie? Okay, I guess they had something better to do. Maybe see another film instead of this one. So, with that said, The beginning of this movie is we of course have Barry who is realizing that he is to kind of get up for his day, and we have him in desperate need of needing food, and so he of course is to go on and almost be late for work again. And so we realize that all of a sudden we have Alfred calling Barry to go on and do this mission, which is just kind of this like running around kind of mission. Like this mission doesn't really have any weight to the story. So we have Barry who is to try and go on and get this meal, which he is to desperately want this one woman behind this counter who is not there, because Barry knows this girl and she knows his order and can make it really quickly for him. But instead, Barry is to have to go on to order this meal, and it's from this guy who is to just kind of want to just chat like no tomorrow and be the slowest worker possible. So while Barry is going on and waiting for his meal at this restaurant or at this kind of cafe or establishment or whatever, I don't really care and or know exactly what this place was, Barry goes on and rushes into the bathroom to then change into his Flash costume to then go on his Batman mission to Gotham City. So we have the Flash that goes into the bathroom and then walks out and is to go onto the street, and we all of a sudden have a bunch of these Flash fans that are like, oh my god, it's a Flash, this is amazing. And so we have Barry who is to have this kind of monitor on his wrist that is to showcase how kind of empty his body is, because we realize that Barry is to have a fast metabolism and he burns through a lot of his food, so he has to have a large amount of food consistently, because that's to always be the thing about Flash, is that he has to just eat and chow down on a lot of food, hence why I'm sure Barry has to hang out with guys like Bruce Wayne, so that way he can be able to eat a justifyingly good enough meal, so that way he can always have enough power. So Barry goes on to ask desperately for the fans that he sees off to the side, like, well, hey man, like, are you gonna eat that? Are you gonna eat that hot dog? Are you gonna eat that Pop-Tart? Are you gonna eat that whatever? So like this also just kind of becomes like this goofy thing where we just kind of see like Flash like stealing food from random people that he runs nearby, because like that's the goofy thing now of this character. We didn't see any of that in like the Justice League or whatever films, but we have to see that now here. So we're seeing Barry going on and kind of stealing random hot dogs and whatever so that he can eat something, and he goes on to then make his way to this hospital. And so this hospital, of course, is kind of buckling or collapsing, and so Barry has to kind of quickly save all these people from these possible injuries. All while Batman is off on his own, trying to chase after these men who have kind of stolen this item and whatever. Again, this thing doesn't have a huge part of the story, but it's like this cool little action sequence that they can just put together for here. And it also just kind of is to connect with the fact that both Barry and Batman are to be both in the early parts of this movie, and so on and so forth. So, and we also have to connect between both Batman and Flash, that they have kind of lost parents, or a parent in this case for Barry. So And we also have to connect that Bruce Wayne will, of course, give Barry some evidence that can possibly help him out in his father's case. So Barry goes on to make his way to this hospital that seems to be like the ground is shaking and collapsing and whichever. So Barry is going on and talking to Alfred this whole time, which I'm like, all right, like this is really cool. We have all of a sudden like Alfred is to kind of be like the oracle of the Justice League, I guess. That just seems very weird. So we go on, we have Barry who is having to trying to fix this like pipe situation, and he is going on and complaining about how he consistently has to go on and help Batman with all of the problems that Batman has, because he's having to like kind of be the janitor for the Justice League, and he's getting annoyed by it. So, and how every one of the janitor like problems has to be connected to Batman in some way or another. So we have Barry that is to all of a sudden like start to realize that like he's hearing this like really loud grumbling sound, and Flash justifies that it's his stomach, but Bruce is to make, or Batman is to make the assumption that it's the building that is gonna like fall. So Barry goes on to like think at first like, oh no, like there's nothing wrong with the building, but then all of a sudden we see the building that is just start to like fall over a good piece of it. So Barry goes on and is to like go into kind of like the slow motion of things, and we start to see this nurse as well as a number of babies all fall from this window to seemingly make its way to like to just fall out of this building. So we bizarrely have this kind of Quicksilver like moment. That's what I usually compare it to. So we bizarrely have Barry who's needing to not only save this nurse woman, but then save all of these babies, and so he has to come up with a perfect way of protecting them all while they're all like simultaneously falling. So he bizarrely in one of these scenes puts a baby in a microwave, which I'm like, oh my god. That is like the worst. But like they justify it by like, well, like if he didn't put the baby in the microwave, like the fire would have gone on and hurt the baby. And I'm like, he could have moved the baby elsewhere. That was the goofiest thing of this film. Not only that, we have like the stack of babies where like Barry is trying to like protect them from like acid and all these other goofy things. So Barry eventually goes on to get every single one of these babies in this stretcher, in this bed, and they're all okay. And then eventually Barry kind of like chucks the nurse over his shoulder, and so we have Barry that goes into normal time, and all the babies are safe on this bed, and he also is to have the nurse. So Barry goes on and tells this nurse, like, well, hey, like, you've been through a very traumatic event, and I would honestly tell you to try and seek, like, psychological help. And to, of course, now try and seek out the Justice League for that, because there's nobody who has that ability. So, like, that was kind of funny, because he's kind of setting up how, like, the Justice League is, how they're kind of all, like, kind of just crazy people, and why would you want to, like, seek out therapy from any number of those people. So, we then go after that. And so once Barry has gone on to like save that building and so on and so forth, save all those people, we then have still the chase that is going on. So Batman has gone on with his motorcycle to kind of chase down these men, and so eventually what happens is we of course go on to have Batman, who is with his weapons of sorts, is to try and save a man who is kind of dangling from this bridge. And so it seems that Batman at some point is possibly going to lose this guy who has this weapon that might um, detonate and so on and so forth in this water, and it's going to be horrible. So we're thinking, like, well, what is Batman going to do? Who's going to save him? How is Barry going to help him out in this situation? We come to find out that instead we see this yellow lasso coming out to help out Batman in this situation, and we realize that Wonder Woman is to be involved. Like, oh my god, Wonder Woman's involved in another DC comic book movie? Oh my god. That obviously tells me that going forward, Gal Gadot has probably still got to be the Wonder Woman, but I don't really like Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. I just don't. And I would love for her to go on and just do anything else. If Gal Gadot could go on and just do any other thing besides Wonder Woman, I would be happy. And then you would give me a brand new Wonder Woman, and again, ecstatic about that. Because any of the other Gal Gadot things, I don't really see. So I saw like Red Notice, but that was about it. So if Gal Gadot could really just go on and just not do Wonder Woman anymore, I would be ecstatic, because I don't like Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman at all. And every time I go on and see her on something, I immediately have eye rolling like things. So we realize that bizarrely, the lasso of truth is tied to both the thief as well as also Batman. So we all of a sudden start to realize that now Flash has kind of showed up, and is to realize both Wonder Woman and Batman are kind of just doing a little chit chat. So when Batman is to all of a sudden start to reveal secrets about himself, because Batman and Lasso of Truth, we then have Barry, who is trying to go on and help, of course, Batman break free through the Lasso of Truth. And we then all of a sudden have Barry, who's starting to reveal secrets also about him never having sex and stuff like that. So when they go on to get the Lasso of Truth off, we have Barry, who is to try to like kind of make a joke about the whole sex thing, about how he was talking. Yeah, like I just can't wait till later till I have to go on and talk about how Barry was to be naked for quite a bit of time. Yeah, that's so exciting. I get that whole thing, that whole like Barry being nude as a way to try to sell this to women. Like, hey, like, I bet you're gonna love the point where Ezra Miller just walk around in the buff. Isn't that great? For whoever is to be really interested in that, either women or gay men, or whoever, maybe certain just straight guys will be interested in kind of a guy in the buff. I don't know. But whatever. Not judging anybody. So, we have, of course, kind of Wonder Woman just kind of go off. She's not involved in the rest of this movie. So now we have to do a head count of all of the Justice League characters who are to of some who is to have supposedly been involved in this movie but were not. So in the Snyder Cut, we actually had Martian Manhunter that was on there briefly, but has no connection to this movie whatsoever. And supposedly he was going to be with the Justice League. But I guess F all that noise, right? Then we also have to go on and realize that Cyborg is to not be in this film. They reference him in this film, but he is to not be Cyborg at all in this film, because the actor that, of course, was to have been Cyborg is to have not liked how he was treated on the Justice League movie, and so he washed his hands with the whole entire thing. Then, of course, we also have to realize that Henry Cavill should have been in this film. Considering this whole story is to recycle the Man of Steel thing of things, to not have Henry Cavill in this movie does not make sense to not have had him here. But supposedly, in the original cut, there was to be an end credit scene where Henry was going to be in that scene, but he wasn't. So, whatever. It is what it is for this movie. Let me pause here for a second. Okay, so after Barry and Bats, after Barry and Bats fight crime, and so on and so forth, we have the two of them that have these kind of these talking moments where they go on and have a meal together, and they're connecting with one another, and how they, of course, are to have lost parents, and how in this scene we're going to have Bruce go on and give Barry this flash drive that is to possibly help Barry with evidence of his father's crime to possibly absolve him. So we have Barry that goes on and takes this flash drive, and we see this video of Barry's dad going on and getting this like can of pasta or something. So we go into this video, and it's the clip of Barry's dad who is to go to this grocery store, but you never see his face in the camera. So, like, that could have been a perfect thing to have Barry's dad get absolved of this crime, but, like, you never actually get to see his face. So Barry is just kind of disappointed about that, and so immediately he calls his father about it. So we have Barry who's talking to his dad, and they're kind of reminiscing about, of course, about Barry's mother, and so that just pushes Barry even further to want to go back to his original home. So Barry's talking to his dad, and so, like, Barry's relaying the news that, like, his dad never showed his face in the one footage, and so, like, they're just kind of talking about the old times, about how Henry remembers how Nora would of course sing this song, and so all of a sudden Barry is having this flashback as a younger version of himself, and, like, he's reliving the moment right before his mother died. So we have, like, Barry and his dad who's just kind of goofing around, and we have Nora who mentions to Henry, it's like, well, hey, can you go to the grocery store to give me a can of pasta, or give me a can of like ragu or whatever kind of goofy crap that is. So Henry ends up going like, oh, okay, I'll go on and I'll do that. And we all of a sudden have Nora, who is to start to be singing this song, and Henry's like, oh no, like she's starting to sing, I gotta get out of here. So Henry goes on and he leaves. So we have Barry here, who is with his mother, and she goes on and gets stabbed. We don't see who stabs her because, of course, why would Barry be able to see whoever the killer was? And we have to naturally assume it's not the actual villain within this film, because we find out via action figures that are to be sold connecting to this movie that the villain of this film is to be a character called Dark Flash, which I'm like, I'm sorry, so you guys couldn't have figured out how to have done like Reverse Flash or Zoom or any of the freaking other things that were in like the Flash show, just kind of regurgitated upon this film, because what matters anymore, like that Flash show is now ended. But we have to go with a goofy Dark Flash like thing that they have to justify its origin eventually within the film. So we have Nora with just a knife in her gut, and then we, of course, have Barry's dad come in, realize that his wife is to have been stabbed. So Barry goes on and tells his sons, like, well, hey, like, find somebody who can go on and call the police, so on and so forth. So Barry goes on and does just so. So we have Barry, who is to realize that he wants to go on and he wants to go back in time to try and stop his mother from getting killed, because he leaves his home and he starts running, and he starts running really fast, and that gets him into this thing called the Speed Force, which is a way for Barry to be able to time travel. So Barry then realizes that he has the ability to use the Speed Force, and he of course has to go on and tell everybody about it. And like he has to tell Bruce, it's like, oh my god, I figured this out, it's great, it's amazing. And so we of course have Bruce telling Barry, it's like, yeah, that's great that you're able to have done that, but like, if you go into the past, like, you can have like really drastic like repercussions of doing that, and so on and so forth. Like, for every little like thing that you step on, for every little goofy decision you make, like, could really drastically affect what's going on. So Barry eventually also realizes he has a job at some point. He has to do his job. And so at some point we realize that Gary is a CSI investigating thing. It's a very small thing about this film, but it is what it is. So Gary goes on and eventually does his CSI job. He goes on and kind of combs this glove at some point, just to eventually get us to this reporter, who of course is Iris West, and to also showcase some of Barry's friends and Gary's boss. Honestly, I think a lot of these characters were way better showcased in the Flash show than they are here, but like, these characters just have to exist for the sake of movie, because we're just going to go on to reboot all of these characters anyways, so it doesn't matter. A number of these characters are probably going to get rebooted or whatever, because we're supposedly going to still have Ezra Miller as the Flash, I guess. It's a really weird, strange thing that DC is trying to do, where it's wanting to keep things and then throw things away, but it seems to only really want to throw away Henry Cavill as Superman and the actor of whoever was Cyborg. It wants to keep everything else, but F Henry Cavill as Superman and Cyborg. And as well as Ben Affleck as Batman, we're going to go on and do other goofy things. So Barry goes on and eventually talks to Iris, and Iris is wanting to ask Barry about his dad, because supposedly Barry is coming up for an appeal soon. And so we have Barry, while talking to Iris, eventually he comes up with a way of how he can go back in time to try and correct the past. And we have Barry who goes to his house and has to try and clean everything up. But then eventually when Iris is to kind of further go into the house, like she kind of closes a door or does something, and all of a sudden all of this crap just comes flying out. So it's funny, but it's also just kind of very stupid. It's like, well, yeah, you have to have the cliche-ish, like, Barry try to quickly clean all this stuff and everything is falling out of one closet or whatever. It's stupid, but it's also kind of funny. So Barry goes back in time, and the weird, goofy thing about this is Barry goes back in time just to put a can of pasta into his mother's cart, and that somehow stops Barry's mother from getting killed. I'm sorry, if you have a speedster that is to have killed Nora, I think that he's going to go on and easily get away with it. I don't know, I guess that's just me. But so, it seems that we go on to have Barry go back in time to that grocery store and give his mother an extra can and a can of sauce. Yeah, let's go with that. So we then have Barry go back into the Speed Force and start to realize that his mother is to live a much longer life. And so Barry is kind of reflecting on this and like, oh my god, this is amazing. Like, I'm seeing that my mother is alive for my 18th birthday. This is great. And then we all of a sudden see the Dark Flash just kind of hurling in, and he punches Flash in the face. So we all of a sudden have Barry, who is to come back to his home and realize that his mother is still alive. So Barry is to quickly come up with some like random clothes that he finds in one of his neighbor's places. And so he comes back to his house, he hugs his mother, and beyond them just kind of weirdly being like estranged of Barry's clothes, we then realize that while both Nora and both Henry are talking, Barry has like lived a really kind of different life than what he is known for having, as well as also Barry is to even start to realize that off in the distance, another Barry is actually coming to this location. So Barry is to go on and realize like this is like a whole kind of like Marty McFly situation where Barry is seeing himself. And so what Barry tries to go on and do is to try and quickly grab himself and try to talk to him and he tries to like kind of put on this underwear over his head, but it doesn't work out. So 18-year-old Barry sees older Barry, and so they're having a conversation together. So while Barry is talking to younger Barry, we then realize that this younger Barry doesn't have his powers yet, but his powers are going to come on this exact specific day. So older Barry has to go on and force Barry into this laboratory so Barry, as he is to be 18, can get his superpowers. So Barry has to go on and phase younger Barry, like kind of just like kind of grab onto him and phase him into certain areas. So like there's this goofy thing about like the whole phasing thing, as well as also when Batman is to use kind of his like grappling hooks, and Barry is kind of hugging on to Batman. It looks very weird. So we have Barry that phases through everything, and we start to have Barry who's to explain to younger Barry what is going to transpire here, that like that this is really going to hurt, but he'll get superpowers. So we have Barry explaining this, and Barry's like, I don't want to get hit by electricity. I don't want to get hit by lightning. Like, how about you do it? Like, I don't want to do it. And Barry's like, no, you need to do this so that way you can get these superpowers. So they're struggling, they're battling, they're whatever. And so what ends up happening is that the chemicals as well as the lightning ends up hitting older Barry and also hitting younger Barry. And what happens is that older Barry ends up losing his powers, but younger Barry gains them. So we all of a sudden have older Barry who's to also lose one of his teeth, and it ends up in younger Barry's mouth. So it's kind of like, Pah! That was kind of funny. And older Barry like kind of super glues his tooth back in. So that I kind of thought was funny. Like if they ever want to go on and use that in other films, I think that would be kind of fun to like kind of bring back up. But again, we'll probably have a reboot or retcon or whatever of the DCU, so it'll be whatever it needs to be. So Barry after that is to go on and realize that like they need to escape from this building, and Barry realizes that he can't phase and he can't speed run. So we now have it to where Barry has to completely rely on younger Barry. And so once they leave this area, they make their way back to Barry's place, and then Barry realizes, oh my god, like I can I can now have all these abilities. So Barry goes on and is to younger Barry is to test all of these abilities and is to kind of run really fast, but all of his clothes start to burn off of him. So Barry has to quickly kind of toss all of his clothes off and is now just kind of running around the streets nude. So Barry has to go on and kind of randomly grab this like tambourine and kind of put it over his junk to make his way back to his place. And so younger Barry is talking to Barry. It's like, well, hey, like all of my clothes burned off. It's like, well, yeah, because you have to have this like specialty suit. And so Barry is kind of giving this unexperienced superhero like all of this knowledge and so on and so forth. So Barry then goes on to give him this ring that is to unlock this suit. So Barry goes on, older Barry explains to younger Barry how the whole suit ring works. And so, like, the suit just kind of comes off of, or comes out of the ring. And so Barry's like, okay, well, or younger Barry's like, okay, what do I need to have done? And so Barry goes on and tells younger Barry, it's like, well, you should have changed. And younger Barry's like, why? Like you would have just seen me naked. And older Barry's like, no, like just you could have gone on and just kind of changed quickly, and you could like stop time and kind of put the suit on. So younger Barry does go on and put the suit on, and he goes on and complains about how this suit, of course, does not fit him because it's kind of tied around his dick, his Johnson, his manhood, his twig and berries. So we consistently have younger Barry who is making cracks about how his suit does not or fits him more in the Johnson area, in the manhood area, in the twig and berries area. So the Huyven area. So we have, of course, Barry that eventually has to realize that he has to make another experiment to get his powers. So eventually that's going to come up when Barry is to go on and be with Batman. But we'll get there. So Barry then realizes that that this world doesn't really have a Justice League, as we have both Barrys find out that Zod is calling for a Kryptonian. So Barry then realizes that this time period that he is in is to be tied to the Man of Steel storyline. And so Flash is going on and giving us like his rough draft costume that he had, that he went on to try and save some girl and not her father. And excuse me. And so supposedly like this is kind of the early like start of Barry having his power, and because he wasn't like strong enough to be able to like use his power to his best benefit, like that was kind of his early mistakes as being a hero. So we have Barry who realizes that since he can't easily find where Clark Kent is to try and save the world here, because of course Barry realizes the only deterrent of Zod, of course, has to be Superman. So Barry is going on and telling every bit of who Superman is and so on and so forth to younger Barry. And so we have Barry that is going with younger Barry to find Bruce Wayne, because the only person who is to be able to have technology to be able to find somebody in this kind of world has to be a Bruce Wayne. So we have Barry that has to go on and try and find Wayne Manor, and so he does. And so eventually, when he makes his way to this home, he's calling out for Bruce. And so they end up going into this kitchen that eventually has all these kind of weird bells and so on and so forth, and all these kind of statues, which, of course, if you've ever gone on and seen the original Batman movie, you'll understand why all those statues exist. Because, of course, we have the whole goofy scene where the one guy is to talk about, like, is he Bruce Wayne or Bruce Vane? And we have all of these statues around, and we of course have Bruce Wayne at some point stating it's, well, hey, like, some of this stuff in this mansion is very much me, and some of it really isn't. To really just state that at some point it was to probably be some of his ancestors' stuff, or possibly his father's or mother's stuff, and it wasn't really his, so that's why he said that. So we come into the Wayne Manor, and they're in the kitchen. And so what happens is we come to find a weird and or goofy looking, kind of very disheveled Bruce Wayne attack both Barrys, and then eventually we then realize that this seemingly stunt double for most of this, and then eventually we see that it is Keaton. We have to go on and understand why this is Michael Keaton instead of Ben Affleck. So we have Keaton, who of course starts to try and beat up both these guys, but of course he's kind of rusty and ill-equipped because he hasn't gone on and fought crime in Gotham City in quite a while, because Gotham City to Bruce Wayne is now a paradise. Like, no one goes on and does crime in Gotham City. So we have Bruce that is to go on and make this spaghetti and pasta thing. And so while he goes on to explain through this whole spaghetti analogy how Barry has kind of conflicted with time, and how Barry went on and changed something in the past, not only changes Barry's present and future, but then is to also change everything that happened in the past also. So that is why, like, Barry is all of a sudden now in a completely different, like, dimension of time, because Barry had changed one little thing. So any one little thing can drastically change an entire world. So Barry in some ways is kind of in another dimension, but is also in his own Earth. So it's just kind of very weird. So we have Bruce, who's kind of explaining this with this kind of this pasta strand. I'm like, all right, this is really good. It's really cool. I really like this idea, how you can go on and kind of really affect the world as a whole. And if you want to go on to recast anybody or do anything, like, you can actually make sense of it because of that whole, like, Michael Keaton Batman thing. So we have both Barrys go in to the Batcave, and some of it, of course, looks to be a mixture of both. Like, it tries to look like the 89 Batman, but then it also tries to look like the Christian Bale Batman also in a lot of ways. We have the whole well thing. We have the whole, like, opening, like, waterfall thing that, like, the Bale movies had. So, like, there's a mixture of kind of visual stuff here. There's a mixture of just kind of things that are to be from both of those kind of movies combined here, trying to put together, like, the best of both worlds. So older Barry and younger Barry are both bickering, and so Barry is kind of bickering at younger Barry because of Barry having a mother and, like, not really caring much about, like, their goofy monkey toy that they had. So younger Barry is trying to, like, tell older Barry to, like, hey man, like, relax. And older Barry is like, well, yeah, like, I guess I'm a much different Barry than you are. because like it's very hard for me to like to trust people and everything like that, because this Barry has to be much different than this 18-year-old Barry. And like we can really start to like understand why, because this older Barry is from a different world, but then is also to been a much more like hardened person. So because he's experienced a lot of things, he's seen a lot of things, he's fought a lot of crime and so on and so forth, and he's seen people get killed and a number of other things. So he's just kind of like really like PTSD and all kinds of other things. So we have both. So we can't have Barry just go to the Kent farm to try and find Clark Kent, because that's what Barry has gone on to the Batcave to try and find, is Clark Kent's address, or to figure out where he is. So Barry cannot go on and try and find Kal-El or Clark or whichever. So what he does try and do is eventually get Batman to start working with Barry, and so Batman is to go on and clean himself up and realize that he should kind of hey man, kind of clean your beard and definitely cut that hair, man. So we have Bruce, who is talking to Barry and mentioned how like they're connected in both of their worlds, how they have lost parents, and that they had a friend named Alfred, and we don't have the actual Alfred from this Batman, because of course that Alfred had died, and I guess Bruce never really had anybody ever bizarrely take care of him, so I guess that's why he had the weird pasta. So Bruce then is to go on and open up this kind of bookcase, and that's where all the bat suits are. Of course, the thing that you've probably seen in some goofy trailer somewhere or some image of this movie. So we have, of course, Batman that puts on the bat suit, and of course, yeah, I'm Batman. Like, some of the best stuff about this movie was kind of ruined by the trailers. F all of that noise. So we now have Batman, who is located a Kryptonian, but it's in Russia somewhere. I'm like, so here's the thing. So much about this is very much like the original Flashpoint story, and I feel like now there's a point where I need to tie those things together. So, from the original comic book Flashpoint story, one was that Barry had lost his powers of being the Flash. And then two, we go on to have a Kryptonian that is in Russia, because in the Flashpoint story, we come to find that that the Superman didn't land in the Clark Kent farm. It landed elsewhere, which left Superman to be experimented on, or in this case, a Supergirl. So I'm trying to think if there's any other tie. I'm sure there will be as we go along, and I'll kind of make the connections here. So we have Batman that can locate the Kryptonian, so they're like, okay, we got to go to Russia. We gotta collect this Kryptonian. to save Kal-El. Oh, we also had Barry, who is trying to connect with a lot of his other Justice League members, because Barry realizes that there is no Justice League in this world. And Barry calls in to try to connect with Arthur Curry, but instead only gets Tom Curry, who is to have gone on and married some just woman from the island, and instead of marrying Nicole Kidman's character and having Aquaman. So, like a bizarre, goofy thing of that. So, Barry calls Tom Curry to eventually have that whole conversation that was just a big, massive waste. That kind of goes nowhere. So Barry goes to Russia with Batman and other Barry. So they go on this mission, and this is to be like the massive showcasing of how great Michael Keaton Batman still always is, as well as also to showcase kind of like the Batwing, that big massive thing that we saw in the very first Batman film. But like this Batwing is kind of very is drastically kind of done differently than the original Batman movie was. So like there's some kind of cool thing where we find that the Batwing can do this kind of weird spinning, rotating thing that looks really, really cool. And we'll see that more when Batman tries to face off against one of the Kryptonians, which was like the coolest thing. I was like, yeah! Like Batman's fighting some Kryptonians? Whoever that Kryptonian was, the goofy one, the big large one, I don't remember that from Man of Steel. I'm sure if you go on into my Man of Steel review, I probably know the names of all the characters for that, bizarrely. But I do know the other one besides Zod is Fiora, because it says that on IMDb. So, huzzah for that. So, as well as the other technical Kryptonians, because there was other different Supermen and super women and super Batmans and whatever. That was a thing. That was a thing that I thought was funny. Where they all of a sudden talk about, like, you never see, like, Batman call himself Super Batman or whatever. It's goofy. So, Russia. Let's get there. So, we have, of course, Batman, who is to try to be as, like, stealthy as can be, because Batman. And we have both Barrys trying to make their way through this complex, and we immediately have young Barry with his early set of powers, and he accidentally like drops this one shovel, and everybody in the facility knows it. And so we have one guy who hits this alarm. All of a sudden, all these guys with guns arrive with these like AK-47s and start blasting away. Younger Barry is to try and protect the older Barry from this barrage of bullets coming to him. So we have this kind of bullet time event where young Barry is to try and save older Barry. And so eventually at some point we have younger Barry who gets a bullet to the knee and goes down. So eventually, we do have the two Barrys, and Batman find Supergirl. I don't remember if she actually had another name for this Supergirl, but anyways, doesn't matter. I'm just gonna call her Supergirl anyways, because she's not gonna have much of a shelf life beyond this film, sadly enough. So we have Batman, who is to try to use this elevator so that way everyone can get out of this building. And we, of course, have this reference again to the Batman 89, where we have Batman, who asks like Flash, like, how much do you weigh? And of course, I remember that from the first Batman, where of course Batman asks uh, the girl that he's with, it's like, well, how much do you weigh? And he's like, there's no way that you actually weighed that much. And that she possibly lied about it. So I thought that was kind of funny. So they end up going on and using this elevator to escape this area. And so now we come to find that all of these Russian men are to make their way surrounding all of these characters here. So Batman's like, well, okay, like it's time for us to figure out a way to survive here and fight our way out of this. But then we have all of a sudden like Supergirl, who wakes up because of course the yellow sun is reviving her, and so she's ready to just kind of kick butt because she was what I want to say here is Supergirl was possibly in this like cocoon thing that had the power of a red sun, and so that kind of killed off her ability to have power, and that's why like at first she looks so skinny when she's in that cocoon thing, because the cocoon was powering the red sun because for some reason the Russians had figured that out. So that also is to be another thing identical to the other Flashpoint story. So we have Supergirl, who goes on and is just beating all kinds of crap out of all these guys. And I was like, yeah. Like, Supergirl is even trying to, like, beat up people that, like, Batman was already trying to beat up and whatever. Like, she was just trying to steal everything from everybody. So, now that that, of course, went well, we then have Batman that's like, okay, well, let's get out of here. Like, let's get in the Batwing and get out of here. So they make their way back to Wayne Manor, and so now we of course have to have Supergirl, who needs to get updated on the whole situation that Zod's here and is trying to take over, and that there's a possibility that there is no Kal-El present in whichever. And so Supergirl doesn't really understand what has happened to Kal-El, and so she just realizes, like, well, like, I might be the only deterrent against Zod, so, like, I'm gonna have to go on and I'm gonna have to meet him. And so as soon as Supergirl has kind of gotten her tan on and so on and so forth, she's going on and talking to younger Barry, and she's like, well, okay, well, I'm gonna have to go on and I'm gonna have to face against Zod because it's the right thing to do. So Barry then realizes with other Barry, like, okay, what of course Supergirl is doing, and they realize that they're gonna have to come in and they're gonna have to help. Also, Michael Keaton's like, okay, I'm gonna have to come in, I'm gonna have to help in this situation, but he brings in the Batwing because of course he can't like fly and whatever and get there as quickly as any of these other people. So by the time that Supergirl makes her way to see that Zod is talking to the military, we go on to have Zod start to kill some of these military members, and we start to see that this turns out to be like an all-out war. So here is where we get to like some big huge battle things that's kind of cool. And so, and I feel like I'm kind of like skipping like a big huge chunk of this film, but I'm just going to go into it how I'm going to go into it, and it'll be how it is. So we have Batman, who's like trying to use some of his rockets to try to take out some of these like Kryptonian ships, and it looks really cool. And we have Batgirl fighting against Kryptonians. It's really cool. And we have some of the characters who are from the Man of Steel movie, and yeah, feels good. Anyways, so we have eventually the Kryptonian characters with their super hearing being able to notice Supergirl from a distance. They're like all right, like let's beat up her. So the Kryptonians go on and fight against Supergirl, and so we now have to have both Barrys try to figure out a way to take out all the Kryptonians. And we have them kind of fighting, and like Batman is just kind of blowing up all these ships and kind of going in his Batwing. And eventually, what happens consistently is both Batgirl and Batman die for whatever goofy reasons. We have at one point where Batman is to try and take down this one ship, and that fails, and Batman gets shot down in the process, and Batman can't go on and eject from his own Batwing, and so Batman is hoping that like Supergirl can help him like eject from his Batplane, but that fails miserably because Supergirl is also very busy fighting off Zod. So what happens is, since Batman can't get out of his Batwing, because I guess there's not two different ways for him to eject from the ship, from his Batwing, we have Batman who's like, well, I'm seeing this big, massive Kryptonian ship. I'm just going to drive right into it. And Barry's like, no! And Michael Keaton Batman just tries to sacrifice himself. He makes a sacrifice play. I'm like, oh, Batman. So we then have Supergirl who is fighting Zod, and what ends up happening is that Zod starts to use some Kryptonian weaponry, and it starts to stab into Supergirl, and they're having this like really emotional, really good chunk of dialogue, where we come to find out that Zod did eventually find Kal-El, and Kal-El wasn't the end-all be-all of them finding the codex for the Kryptonians. Come to find out, it was actually Supergirl all along. So I'm like, okay, like that's kind of worsening like Superman. To say it's like, oh yeah, like Superman was never really all that key of a character. It was actually Supergirl all along, because that's your newest character, right? You have to make Supergirl way more better off than Superman was, because she's new character. I don't quite get also how Supergirl is to be so good at all of these powers right away. Yeah, there's certain times where she goes on and it's like, yeah, I hear a lot, but then she easily like adjusts. Like, I'm sorry, like Superman, it took him years to adjust, but like Supergirl, it takes her like a day. I don't buy that at all. I don't care what they're saying, where it's just like, well, like Supergirl has technically been on Earth a good long time. Like, I'm sorry, like Superman was a baby and was on Earth, and it took him years to adjust. That just seems like Garbo to me. I'm just waiting for another Supergirl movie for her to still be like, yeah, I'm still adjusting to all this Earth stuff because it took Superman years and it can't just take me a day to adjust to all of it. But whatever. Like, we have She-Hulk that ended up being the exact same thing as the Hulk, where She-Hulk ended up being a way better Hulk character than Hulk was. Like, ideally, I'm not trying to say that like a gender thing is a big difference. I'm just like trying to like compare to characters that recently had come out that have similar kind of things as far as story goes. So, big battle, big fights, things are going on. Let's go back to that. So, we have Zod who is facing off against Supergirl, and she is consistently getting killed by Zod. So now the two Barrys realize, like, well, hey, we can use the Speed Force, and we can stop these characters from dying. And young Barry wants to go on and use the Speed Force, but older Barry is telling Barry, it's like, no, 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 like, you haven't had your powers long enough, or like you're not good enough with this yet. So, but it seems that both of them could easily figure out how to use the Speed Force regardless. So both of them are in the Speed Force together, just banging it out. So while older Barry is to try to just stop in the Speed Force and try to figure out this equation and try to figure out how he can stop and save his friends. We have Barry who is to like realize from a math quiz or a math answer that sometimes a thing has too many answers, that there's not just one way to answer anything. So Barry is realizing that there's no way to save both Supergirl and both Batman, because either way they are going to die. This is basically just like the Guy Ritchie or whatever the Guy Pearce or whatever that Time Machine movie was, where we had the guy who goes back to try and save his wife from dying, and whatever he goes on and does, she's still going to die on that same day anyways. Because if that woman would have stayed alive, he would, of course, never have gone on and had that time machine he never would have put that time machine together. So that's like the goofy thing about that time machine movie. So we realized that no matter how many times Barry's, plural, go back, both Supergirl and Batman die regardless. At one point, Barry has Batman dying in his arms as Batman is trying to fight off against a Kryptonian who is attacking his Batwing, and like we have this really cool fight between Batman and this Kryptonian, and it's freaking off the chain. It's off the chain. It's basically Batman versus Superman again, but it's Batman versus Kryptonian goofy character, which I don't remember the name of. So, and plus also, it doesn't really matter because it's not like he had any lines or anything to really say here because he's just Kryptonian guy. So, we then go on to have Supergirl and Batman consistently die. So, both Barrys in the Speed Force, and so younger Barry is consistently wanting to figure out a way to save Supergirl because it seems that younger Barry is really attracted to Supergirl, and so he's going to do anything to try and save her. So what ends up happening is in one of the time loops, both Barrys try to go back to try and save both of their friends, and the younger Barry ends up getting a Kryptonian shard in his arm. And so what younger Barry does is he uses this Kryptonian shard as a way to attack Fiora and kill her, which I was like, yeah! So we all of a sudden have one Flash that has this Kryptonian piece within his body, and he's using it as a weapon. And so younger Barry consistently tries to keep going back to try and save Supergirl, and every single time he keeps going back, he ends up with another Kryptonian piece somewhere lodged in his body somewhere. So older Barry is to start to realize that there's no way that they can fix this problem, and Barry further and further realizes he needs to go back to no longer save his mother, and younger Barry is to, of course, not want Barry to go on and do that. So we all of a sudden have Dark Flash face off against Barry, both Barrys in the Speed Force. So we come to find out that Dark Flash is to actually be the younger Barry who has grown old in the Speed Force, trying to come up with the answer of how he can save his friends and so on and so forth, and help everybody. So because we kind of remove Dark Flash's face to realize that it's actually Ezra Miller. So an older Ezra Miller. So what happens is that both Flashes face off against Dark Flash, and Dark Flash ends up having this one like Kryptonian piece that ends up getting lodged into the younger Flash, killing him. The older Flash tells younger Barry, it's like, well, hey, like, this is gonna heal, you're gonna be okay. And the younger Flash dies. So I'm like, wouldn't older Flash be dead then? But then when thinking about it, it's like, no, this is a whole nother like dimension, time loop, goofy thing anyways. So before younger Flash dies, he gives the monkey to Barry and it's like, hey, like, I know you gotta do what you gotta do, and I know it's right. So, like, just kind of tell our mother that that you love her and whatever. So Barry goes back in time to the grocery store, and he takes out that one can of stuff. And Barry goes on and talks to his mother. And so this mother does not know that this is to be a older Barry. You would think that he would just go on and tell her that, but bizarrely, maybe in some instances, like, she might just know that this is to be her older son, bizarrely. She wants to hug him and comfort him and all kinds of other things, and it's weird. So here is also the goofy Easter egg things that I want to cover, but let's get to that in a second. So Barry goes on to then be able to leave, and everything starts to be the way it was. So let's get to the Easter eggs. So we bizarrely had all these different worlds that come up showing all these Easter egg things of like the George Reeves Superman and the Adam West Batman and the kind of old Flash, the kind of the helmet Flash, the kind of the goofy, almost Thor looking kind of Flash, the speedster. So we also had that, but then we also had like the original Superman character CGI'd in, as well as the Super Girl from the original movies, or from the original movie, come in, and they were both like CGI'd like characters. We had Nicolas Cage, who was a Superman who fought this big spider robot looking thing, which I thought was like really awesome. And some people may not understand what that is. Here's the explanation. So, there was a Tim Burton Superman movie that Nicolas Cage was going to be Superman in. And eventually what ended up happening is that Superman movie never came to be. And so now it became a goofy Easter egg within this Flash movie. And so it's some alternate world where Nicolas Cage was actually to be Superman. So I'm just waiting at some point for Nicolas Cage to just be frickin' Superman at this point. They did it in a animated movie, having Nicolas Cage be the voice of some character and so on and so forth. So yes, let's move on. So let me know all the other goofy Easter eggs that were within this film, because I'm sure there's more of which that I'm probably not going to go on and say, but there's probably a lot more than that. I was waiting for any number of, like, why wasn't the Flash show being used as a thing in this movie? Why wasn't the original Flash cartoon? Why wasn't the Flash cartoon? Why wasn't that used in this film? Why wasn't the Flash original show being used in this film? A lot of stuff that they could have actually used, but no. Unless it was some weird thing that I didn't actually see, but still. There's a lot of Flash stuff that they could have actually used in here, but still. They didn't. So, we now go on to have Barry that is to be back to the world of once he's known. So, we have Barry that has to race to his court hearing of his father and whatever. And so we realize that Barry now has to figure out a way to absolve his father of this crime, and it's all about him just showing his head in this camera. So what happened is that in this new clip, which they shown from years ago, there was a point where the cans were in a different location, because I guess Barry probably used his super speed to change where the cans were for that day. And we go on to have Henry, who ends up, or Barry's dad, who ends up showing his face to this camera because the cans are way up high. And so we come to find that Barry had kind of changed that ripple so that way Barry's dad could be free of murder. So I guess, and we'll never figure out who in this world had killed Barry's mother after all, unless they do some goofy thing about it. So maybe there's going to be a zoom, or maybe there's going to be something else. Who knows? So after that, we go on to have, of course, after the whole court and after Henry is now free, we then have Barry, who is to call Bruce Wayne, and is to now say, it's like, oh my god, like, yeah, my dad is free because that whole clip, and thank you, and whatever. So we have Bruce, who's calling and saying that he's kind of making his way to meet with Barry. And in all honesty, like, whenever we have like any Bruce Wayne who is calling Barry, it all seems like it's coming from the same voice. And the voice is none of any of these actors. So Barry goes on to meet with who he assumes is to be Ben Affleck, Bruce Wayne, and instead it's to be George Clooney Bruce Wayne, and I'm like, oh my god, it's Nipple Batman. Please don't tell me there's gonna be another Nipple Batman movie. I don't want that at all. Like, when in all honesty, like, to possibly have Bruce Wayne, George Clooney be in another Batman movie, I could be fine with that. But do I want another Nipple Batman? Probably not. Like, we can have our cake and eat it too, and have there still be like a Chris O'Donnell Robin and Alicia Silverstone Batgirl and all of that jazz. But I would not want another movie of that. Why? I just like I feel that it's good to kind of do all these Easter eggs, and we kind of leave out Val Kilmer's Batman in this whole entire film. But I get it. Like, it's very hard for you to go on and do a Val Kilmer Batman thing. But still, it kind of sucks that you didn't involve that character. Or use any number of other things that you probably could have actually used, but instead you used goofy, crappy CGI. That obviously sucks. It does. So, some of the actors that they CGI'd were actually still alive, and you could have used them, but you didn't. So, that's the way the movie just kind of wraps up and ends, and we have this end credit scene where both the Flash and Aquaman are talking together, and so they're kind of exchanging kind of what they've kind of both gone through. And so Barry is talking to Arthur how he has kind of seen completely different Batmen, and so all of a sudden, like, Arthur is like very, very drunk. And so the two of them, and Barry can't get drunk at all because he kind of burns through like alcohol, so he can never really get drunk. So we have Arthur, who all of a sudden kind of just falls in this puddle, and the Flash is like, well, hey, my place is just right over here. And Arthur's like, no, I'm fine, and just sleeping off in this puddle because, like, it's not like he can drown anyways. So, with that said, like, that's just how kind of like the end credit scene is. Supposedly, the original end credit scene was supposed to be with Henry Cavill, but now we have to retcon and change a bunch of crap because a bunch of other movies exist. So, I'm kind of ticked that we didn't have Henry Cavill at all in this movie, besides like the back of him or whatever. I think there's also always this worry that someone's going to get sued if any goofy image is to be anywhere. So I'm sure there was a bunch of just consent stuff being put in here. Bizarrely, there was some Superman and Supergirl stuff that was to forcibly be shown in IMDb as archive footage, even though it was like CGI'd stuff. So there's also some people who were in the IMDb, but they weren't credited for whatever. So it's just a lot of goofy crap. So with that said, I'm going to try to quickly get out of here so we can finish this up and put this out. So I could say at the end of all of this, I would definitely go on and rewatch this movie because there's things that I do enjoy about it. But, like, it's not something that I would probably watch a lot. So that's my clear consensus. That I did enjoy this movie, but I also was just like, man, this movie is just garbosh. A lot of it's just garbage. A lot of it's throwaway. And we do realize that hopefully James Gunn is going to put together his DCU. The very first DCU film is actually going to be Blue Beetle because I think it has no real connection with all of the rest of the stuff. So that's what James Gunn is saying. But in all honesty, I feel that it's going to be very hard to try and sell any of these superhero movies in the future, and good luck for anybody trying. Plus, like DC is just having a very rough time trying to sell anything. Plus, like rebooting things over and over and over again does not help when people are just kind of looking for just another sequel to some of these films instead of going on a rebooting. So good luck for James Gunn to try and save a company that has just made too many mistakes at this point. And but I also feel like there is some hope there. I don't know if one man could really just change that ship, but I'd like to see what James Gunn has to offer. It'll be good to see how DC can put its best foot forward, and I've been more interested in their projects now than I probably have ever. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. So I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody. Hi. So I realized that there were two scenes of which that I had completely forgotten about after putting this video out. So rationally in my brain, considering the video I had for this was still out, I was like, okay, well, I can still take the time and talk about these. And from last night to now I have a much more sore throat, so I apologize if I sound a little bit gravelly. But so, to cover two scenes of which that I had completely forgotten about because either one scene was very dumb to me, or we of course have the other scene which was to be the way that Barry had gotten back his power. So let's talk about those. So we of course have two Barrys bickering, and so when younger Barry brings back older Barry into his place, we come to find that a number of people are all living there. And while the two of them are kind of both bickering about how this is to be Barry's kind of younger life, but it's really something that he doesn't exactly remember. They're bickering about how Eric Stoltz is to now be this world's Back to the Future main character instead of Michael J. Fox. We have the leg tattoo that is to be shown to Barry from one of the rando additional characters that it was supposed to be for comedic use, which I thought was just dumb. We have now both of Barry's friends kind of coming from this bed, and again, they are both now dumb people, it seems, as Barry is to mention that a older version of himself is to be his cousin. Just quickly trying to explain this all away, but the two of our characters are trying to go on and talk about the Time Force, and Barry is trying to explain away to his younger self what all is really going on, because we consistently have that happen throughout this film, where older Barry has to continue to teach younger Barry how to use his power and everything along the nature of a rookie hero. We have to have Barry at some points when we have the whole flashing moment where Barry is consistently naked. we have older Barry who is trying to teach younger Barry how to phase and how to be able to use some of the powers, and that of course, Time Force or Speed Force is something that younger Barry cannot access, but eventually he does. So, which I think is kind of goofy, because when you think about it, if you have a villain that is consistently within the Speed Force, how can he consistently keep doing this when he needs food to be able to do his power? So that doesn't quite make sense to me. How can you find food in the Speed Force? So we go on to, of course, have both Barrys bickering and eventually realizing that they need to work together. And we consistently see younger Barry either get scars or get certain kryptonite shards being put into himself. So we now have to talk about the scene where older Barry is to try and get his powers back. So we have older Barry that, of course, goes on to realize that he's going to strap himself onto this electric chair and get all these chemicals that, of course, was to be nearby him when that original experiment struck, and try to recreate this experiment within the Batcave, which is very much similar to the experiment that, of course, was done with Thomas Wayne and the Flash in the comic book. So we go on to have Barry, who is to try and use this experiment again to go on and put the Batman lightning rod thing out onto the Batcave, and the lightning rod does go on to attract the lightning, and it seems that at first that this experiment is going to work, but then it fails. So we are realizing that, bizarrely, Supergirl is having to come back just to take Barry outside so that way he can get hit with lightning yet again, because Batman is realizing that the experiment cannot be attempted yet another time. So Supergirl purposely has to come back just so that way Barry can be hit by lightning again, so that way he can heal. And that's why we have two different Barrys with two different powers within this film. So funny enough, like we had in the animated film, where at some point, like, Barry gets, like, mummified because, of course, he ends up getting really hurt by doing this and gets all these burns. So, to try to get the experiment right. So, those are, of course, to be, like, the two scenes, of course, that I had probably completely forgotten about. So, hopefully I can kind of put these out there. Other than that, let me know in the comments below if there's any other things that I did forget about, any big missing gap things. There, of course, was also the scene where Barry was to get comforted by his mother, and they hug it out, and I think I mentioned that scene. Other than that, yeah, I think everything else is covered, so I'm going to leave it at that. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.